We actually had a little conversation yesterday, I think it was, as we were preparing for this. And I asked him a question, and it's kind of an obvious question. I guess it's an obvious question. How the Jewish perspective looks at this issue of what we call the tempter or the devil. Now, the reason I want to start with this is because I know we're going to get right into it. But can I just read the first part of what your cousin? I'm looking at your cousin's book. If you guys don't know about the cousin's book at this point, you need to start over. Okay. I just want to go to one little
let's
thing.
just tell people what it is, because there might be people starting here.
Okay, well, tell them what it is, Nehemia.
The Bible, the Talmud, and the New Testament, written around 1879 by Rabbi Elijah Tzvi Soloveitchik. It was just translated in 2019 into English, written in Hebrew, and it is considered the first Jewish commentary on the Gospel of Matthew, or actually on anything in the New Testament.
Awesome.
He's literally my second cousin 5 times removed.
Nehemia's cousin. We call it his cousin's book. He does something really interesting. Okay. Now, usually I ask you to do this, Nehemia. Would you be willing to just read the first verse in the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew? Would you just read that for us out loud?
Az lukach Yeshua beruach hakodesh lemidbar lihitnasot me'HaSatan.
Excellent. Now,
can I translate it?
Is it fair to say that your cousin is not looking at a Hebrew manuscript when he's doing this commentary?
Well, that's interesting. So they talk about that. The translator talks about that in the introduction, and it seems he didn't know Greek, and so he probably was using a French translation. He did a lot of this work when he was in Paris. He may have also consulted a Yiddish translation. There's at least one passage that we already saw where he mentions the French translator. So
okay,
yeah.
So let me just give you all his translation from, assuming he's looking at a translation from Greek. Then the Spirit carried Yeshua into the wilderness so that the Satan could test him. And the reason I had to stop is he says, so that the Satan could test him. And I asked you a question yesterday. I said, Nehemia, so for me, my background when I'm reading this in the English, can I just go real quickly to my English version? The English version, folks, I've got all these books here. I want to read this. It says, and I think it's like 18 words. It says, then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Now, your cousin is not looking at a Hebrew text, I'm assuming. He's only looking at a translation that's from Greek. Right. And even he wouldn't fall into the trap that our friend Howard fell into. Can I look at Howard?
What did he fall into?
Okay. Let me just read Howard real quick, folks. Matthew chapter 4. Then Jesus was taken by the Holy Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by, drum roll please, not the Satan, but by capital S-A-T-A-N. Now, the reason I wanted to bring your cousin Howard's translation, certainly Howard is making a decision as he's looking at the Hebrew. He's making an English translation that I personally, I'm not real happy with what he did. But can you tell me why it is that your cousin would immediately see Satan or the devil or whatever you would say that it would be, and he still translates it as, he gives it the definite article, the, and that Howard sees HaSatan right in the Hebrew, and yet he capitalizes S-A-T-A-N. Now, this is starting controversy right off the top, but I want to ask you about this. What is your thought?
Well, let's start with what it says in Greek. So Greek has the word diabolou, which is nominative form, for those who know what that is diabolos, which means devil. Even we say in English diabolical, right? We have the same word. And then both Matthew and Luke have the same exact word. Luke 4:2 has the same thing as Matthew 4:1, that he's tempted by the devil. And so it's interesting here that they translate it as HaSatan. Now, HaSatan, in Hebrew, we have this rule that you cannot identify a personal name by adding hey to it, or you cannot what's called make it. You can't. It's called determination. That's the term, determination. So personal names are already determined. In other words, the name Keith, the name Nehemia, the name John, the name Sally. You can't say in Hebrew the Sally. Now I can in English, right? In English, I can say Which Sally was it? The tall one or the short one? You'd say it was the Sally who is short. You can say that in English.
Right.
In Hebrew, I can't say ha Sally, ha Yeshua. And by the way, that's actually really important when we're looking at Hebrew manuscripts of the New Testament, of which there are many, a couple dozen, maybe more. If we ever see something like ha Yeshua, the Yeshua, we immediately know this is a translation from Greek. Because in Greek, you can do that. In Greek, you can say, in fact, you often would say, ho Jesus. So the Jesus, right, or the Jesus. So the fact that it's HaSatan tells you that Satan is not his name, Satan is his title. That's all. All that is to say, Satan is a title. If it says HaSatan here in the Hebrew, that's true in the Tanakh as well. For example, in Job, we have a very interesting passage where he's referred to as HaSatan, and what's a bit strange about it for some people is, well, he's a character who hasn't been introduced before, right? So often you would identify someone as the, if they've already been introduced in the story, right? You could say an angel came along and he said such, and then you'd say the angel, right? Because he was introduced in an earlier verse. Well, in Job, he's just called, maybe we can read that. Says Job 1:6, one day is a JPS, one day the divine beings, I love that. In the Hebrew, it's B'nai HaElohim, the sons of God. I'll just read from the Hebrew. And it came to pass on the day, and here we have the day. Which day? Right? So it's the same linguistic phenomenon with HaSatan here, as I'll explain in a minute. And it came to pass the day, and the sons of Elohim came to stand before Yehovah, and also the Satan came among them. So what is this the Satan if you haven't identified the Satan yet? So the linguistic explanation, that you'll find this in Gesenius, the Hebrew grammar, Muraoka, which is a wonderful Hebrew grammar, also explains this, is that it means a certain. If you identify a character with ha, and he hasn't been seen before in the story, in the scene, then it means a certain Satan, which is how I would translate it here. Here, let's read it. Then Yeshua was taken by the Holy Spirit to the desert to be tested, it says, we'll get to that, by a certain Satan. And now, but Satan can't be his name, or you wouldn't say HaSatan.
Right.
For personal names of people that are individuals, that's not how it works. So you can do that with geographical names, but you can't do that with individuals. It's actually something that was brought up years ago when they discovered this inscription in Sinai at a place called Kuntalet Adrud. And it's one of the first references to Yehovah outside the Tanakh. And it mentions there Yehovah ve'asherato, and his Asherah. And saying his with a suffix is like saying ha, the. It's a form of determination. And they concluded from that it can't be the name Asherah, but Asherah, there has to be the object, right? There is a goddess called Asherah, but if you say Yehovah and his Asherah, which of course is horrible blasphemy, that's what the inscription says. They're identifying Yehovah as Baal. Baal has an Asherah. You mean, and Asherah is the pole next to the altar of Yehovah, or altar of Baal originally. And so that's the pole that Gideon cut down, the Asherah. So when you say his Asherah, it's like saying the Satan. Asherah is not the name, it is the title.
Yes.
Or in that case, it's the object, the pole. In this case, HaSatan is his role, his title. He is a certain Satan.
So here's what happens, Nehemia. In this verse, I think there are three simple things that I hope we'll discuss. Three simple things that we'll discuss that the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew can help us get some clarity on. So just by looking at the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, and I know for a fact that you're going to be able to bring a lot of other things around this, but just by looking at the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew in the first verse that you just looked at, the first thing that for me, that hit me, was it was taken, and then it says in English here, by the Holy Spirit, but the actual form there in the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, when it says Holy Spirit, what do you have? And I don't know if there are other manuscripts that are different than this.
Well, so the vowel, it's not vocalized, so it could be translated or could be read as Baruch HaKadosh, the Spirit of Holiness, or the Holy Spirit, or Baruch HaKodesh, the Spirit of Holiness. They're very similar. It's two different forms, Kadosh and Kodesh. There are places where this phrase is used in Hebrew Matthew, and it's spelled out with what we call a plene, that is the full form, where it's Kuf Vav Dalad Shin, and that tells you it's HaKodesh. In this one, it's ambiguous, at least in the manuscripts that we're basing it on here. I want to go back to the Satan thing. There's a second possible way of reading this. If it says HaSatan, it could be like Ha-Elohim. When you say Ha-Elohim, the Elohim, you don't mean a certain Elohim, a certain God. Usually you might in some cases. What you mean is Elohim par excellence, right? You mean the, with a capital G, God. And so it could be the Satan. In other words, it is possible that the author of this text believed there was a certain angel who was the enemy, because Satan means enemy or adversary, and that it was enemy with a capital E, or in the JPS, they'll often have adversary with a capital A, the adversary. That is, he is the Satan par excellence. That is a possible interpretation here. What's interesting is when he addresses him in verse 10, and I know I'm jumping ahead, he calls him HaSatan.
Yes.
Right? Satan is still not his name. So whether it's HaSatan, the Satan with a capital S, Satan par excellence, or it is, meaning the main, the angel with the title Satan, or it's a certain Satan, because there could be many angels called Satan, or many entities called Satan that have that title, it's clearly not his name, which is becoming in English, and it became in English probably because interestingly in the Greek, they transliterate it often. If you look in the Greek text of the New Testament, let's just do this live while we're record. We'll do this on the spot here. So I'm going to pull up here my Greek text of the New Testament, the Nestle Allen 28. I'm going to type in Greek, Satanas, and the noun appears 33 times in the New Testament in the Nestle Allen 28 text, 33 times. And let's see. Well, interestingly, Mark 8:33. I love that one. We'll get to that maybe later. Well, let's read it. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said to him, "Get behind me, Satan." Now, is Peter Satan? No, it means enemy. It means adversary here. It never loses its literal meaning. Just like the Hebrew word malach, angel, never loses its literal meaning as well. Meaning, there's two types of angels in the Tanakh. There's malach, angel, who is a human, like Balak, the king of Midian, sends a messenger, and that's called a malach. And similarly, or in contrast, there's a malach, which is a spiritual entity that disappears in a wisp of smoke in the book of Judges. Right? So that literal meaning is still there. Satan here is the enemy. Now, whose enemy is he? And that's probably something that I think Christianity today departs from Judaism. Christianity tends to see Satan as God's enemy.